Hey everybody, welcome to Military Monday. This is Bob Wheeler with ClearedJobs.Net. We're going to be talking about resumes today. So glad to have you with us, like I said, for Military Monday. My name is Bob. Sarah, you want to say hello real quick?
Sure. So, hi everyone. I'm Sarah McMurrow. I've been here for about eight years, I think, with Cleared Jobs, and we've worked with a lot of veterans. We've worked with a lot of companies, and we've learned a lot about what works for resumes. And we're excited to talk to you about what we've learned.
Yeah, so this is a little bit of a lunch and learn thing. We're going to keep this at about a half an hour, but we're going to be talking about resumes because we know that this is a topic that I think that when you're transitioning out, it's one of the first things you start to think about. People are like, hey, do you have a resume ready? And people put a lot of pressure on themselves to get a good resume, to make a good resume. And there's lots of good advice out there. One of the things that we're going to focus on is trying to give you some good tips that are focused to the military transition part, that there's things that are kind of unique to being a veteran coming out. And so this was pretty fun putting this class together because we got a chance to talk to, I mean, we did stuff that we already knew. We've got some knowledge we've already had, but in the last 10 days we talked to 3 or 4 really some recruiters out there to give us the most up-to-date thoughts. That was pretty fun, wasn't it?
It was. I think that, it gives some more credibility too. We see what we see on the resumes, but to have, recruiters that are out there, working with the transitioning service members now doing the reviewing of the resumes and could give us some really real-time feedback was really important and fun, like you said.
Yeah, it's great to talk to recruiters because they really are real people and they really do want to make good hires. So like I said, we've got about a 30-minute lunch and learn here. This is how we're going to go about it. We're going to talk a little bit about the use of military lingo. We're going to talk about some things that you don't need on a resume and some things that you do need. A little bit of the length piece is a good topic to talk about. And then we'll give some format and style tips. And then afterwards, Sarah, we're going to look at some real resumes that you and I kind of went over and found some things to share with. Right. So let's jump into this. Military lingo. The rule of thumb, and you probably hear this all the time, is avoid it. You should avoid using too much military lingo. So how can we avoid that? What can we do to make sure that we're using better words or communicating our ideas better?
I think that one of the things that could be really helpful is take the resume that you've worked on and put it in front of a couple of civilians, not necessarily your family that's been hearing you, use military lingo for years, but people that are really kind of removed from that community, have them review that resume, make sure that they understand it because that's what you need. You need to make sure that, that people that aren't in the military or maybe recruiters that don't have a military background understand what they're reading because
Yeah,
it's so easy to go with the words that you know, right? The lingo that you know.
and when you do this, when you work on your resume this way, it has an extra bonus effect. Gives you some, because when you have to think through how am I going to explain this to somebody who wasn't in the military, this is going to help you make a better elevator speech, pitch, whatever. When you're doing networking, to talking to people, to say, hey, what do you do? You don't have to say, well, it's hard to explain. You've already thought about how to explain it, and it can make your interview process a lot better. So it all kind of leads back to looking at that resume and thinking about things that say, like, how do I break stuff down? What we talk about, sir, we see things like, help desk is one of the types of positions that
Right.
we see, but how does that affect, well, what's that as a good example here?
So, a lot of the branches of the military have jobs that could easily translate to a help desk type of position. For example, I think it's a 25 Bravo, I wrote it down in the Army, the information technology specialist. So, you probably would put that in your resume because that's the actual school that you went to and it's relevant to the type of job that you're looking for. However, if the recruiter doesn't know what each branch of the military calls that type of job, they may not be searching for information technology specialist, right? So, what as a job seeker, what you might want to do is still put information technology specialist and maybe put slash help desk because it's a similar background, but that recruiter is probably searching by key terms when they're looking in their database of resumes or a job board like ClearedJobs.Net. They're looking for help desk. So you need to make sure that type of phrase is in your resume.
Yeah, and that goes along with not just the job title, but also the tools that you work
Right.
with, things that you're dealing with. We were talking. I mean, I was in the Navy. It's crazy. It's been out now for 10 years, but my wife still works on base, so I know that we still use SIPRnet and NIPRNet or some, types of IT systems that are out there. And so, if you're working on the SIPRnet or the NIPRNet, and that's what you do, might want to find a different way to explain that it's an internet, it's a network that does things. That's a secure network or a non-secured or whatever the case may be. So anyway, military lingo, the rule of thumb is to avoid it. But Sarah, it doesn't mean you should never use it. Like, when should you use your military lingo?
Right. So, what if that job says that you need to have a specific background that you can only get in a military job or a military school? Because there are positions out there that have those types of requirements. If you needed to have maybe special forces, someone needs to have, worked in a special forces unit for X number of years. Well, you better make sure that those phrases are in your resume, right? And that's just one example. There are so many examples.
Yeah, I mean, we see on the ClearedJobs.Net site all the time. People are looking for someone with a shipboard background or something with a aircraft background or special forces, or maybe the job description actually says you're going to be working on the SIPR net and the NIPR net. Well, then, heck yeah, put that all over your resume. You
Right.
say the things that are going to connect with the job is what you want to do. And you know
Right.
what? This really does it. You're probably going to have a lot of resumes, a lot of versions of the same resume in some ways, right?
Exactly.
All right. So some things that you don't need, no matter what you're talking about, there's some things that you really don't need. And this list comes from things that we've seen on resumes and that recruiters have seen on resumes and told us about. We've seen people use their whole DD-214 as part of their resume. That doesn't make any sense at all. And I get that if you're working on USA jobs and you're trying to apply for, they may require that as a separate document. But when you're talking about job boards, job fairs, applying for positions, you don't need that. You don't need your fitness reports or your performance evaluations. What we had the one guy that talked about the standard military training courses, right, Sarah? When we were talking to him, was it Dennis, Dave?
Right. Right, exactly. So, I mean, as a service member, you have been through some sort of the base job, right? Army basic training, officer, you're an officer basic course, whatever it is. If everyone who has a particular rank has been through, you know, basic training in the Army, no need to put that on your resume because it's implied. Everyone knows that you did. Stay away from those ones, but more important, you want to put the ones that are important, right? And we'll talk about that in the next slide, but don't worry about the things that everyone has. They don't need to know. It's just as fluff in your resume.
Yeah, and just like awards too. Awards, if it's specific related to the job or something like that, yes, it's fine. But when you go out there and you're listing all of your awards to include your National Defense Medal and your Global War on Terrorist Service Medal and stuff like that, I use the phrase you're diluting your resume instead of distilling it down. You're putting all this extra stuff in there, things that really don't mean anything. Similar to like soft skills, they can be good sometimes, but not an extensive list. And we do see this with resumes where, if a person doesn't really know what they're trying to do, they just list lots of leadership and management and team building and stuff like that. But you want to avoid having too many of those things. Some other things that are more specific: disability rating, don't need it. And you don't see this often, but I've seen it more than once of people putting their disability rating on a resume. What about those last couple things there, Sarah? The specific location and references and stuff like that.
Right. So, social security number, there's no room for that on your resume. There's absolutely no reason that is, putting your personal identification information out there for virtually anyone to see, any recruiter to see. What if it ends up in the wrong hands? It's just unnecessary. When a recruiter's ready to verify your clearance status, they're going to request your social, or the FSO is going to request your social. No need to put it on your resume. And same thing with the street address. It's not necessary. If you want to include your city and state on your resume, you can do that. You don't even have to do that. Sometimes people who are transitioning out of the service because you're unsure about where you want to end up, you know, sometimes they don't even put a location. And you can do that too, but definitely don't need to put your street address. No one's going to show up at your house with a basket. I get that
Yeah.
story, right?
Yeah.
And references too. I mean, that's kind of an old school way of thinking. We used to say, 20 years ago, yes, absolutely put all of your references on your resume and, have that information in your back pocket in case someone wants to talk to someone that you've worked with, but there's no need to put, their information on your resume either.
Yeah. Again, it's just taking up extra space. It's diluting, not
Right.
distilling. But now there are some things that
Exactly.
you do need. I mean, you do need some kind of contact information, right, Sarah? And clearance levels.
Yes.
And go ahead and just talk this slide for us.
Yes. Okay. So, I said, talked a little bit about the city and state. You can put your city and state. You don't have to, but definitely don't need more. A professional email address. So a .mil can be tricky, right? Because sometimes things get stuck in spam filters, emails don't get through. What if you don't have access to that anymore? What if you need your cat card to access it? So kind of stay away from the .mil because once you're out of the military, it's a little bit more tricky to access those emails. And on the same line, see that word professional there? Stay away from the email address you created in 10th grade, that's like hotdog427 or, whatever. I can't even think. Mine was princess something. Definitely not professional. So like, create yourself a nice professional email contact information, right, Bob? I mean,
Yeah.
you don't want to create yourself this really nice profile and then not give the recruiter somewhere to call you.
And it happens. People do it, and
It
that's
does.
so frustrating for that recruiter. Says, "I found somebody. I really want to talk to them, and they didn't put their information on here." So yeah,
Right.
you want to do that. Clearance dates and transition. This is stuff that now we're talking about. This is definitely some specific for the transitioning veteran. And if you're looking at a position that involves clearances, if you think you might, if you're on ClearedJobs.Net, put that clearance level on there and try to get the date. You can talk to your FSO. It's so much easier to find out your adjudication date and all that kind of information while you're still in. It's almost impossible once you're out. So try to do it while you're in. Get a letter from them if you can, that says this, that you can remember. Put that on your resume. Recruiters love to see that. And then the transition
Yes.
date and the availability date is something that I think too many people don't put it in there when they're getting out, but it can be real helpful for that recruiter to know, because your resume lives on for a while. You say right now that you're available March of 2025. That sounds like it's almost a year away. That resume might live on in their system for a while, and come December, they're all about talking to you now because it says it's coming up. So listing that information in there on your resume is very important. Length, long enough, but not too long. Don't let it lose focus. You want to talk about length here, Sarah?
Sure. So I probably most often hear 2 to 3 pages is great. But like Bob said, don't limit yourself to that one pager. That's, again, kind of an old school way of thinking, make sure everything goes on one page. You might have more information than you can fit on one page. So don't take things out that are important just to keep it at one page. But then, and this we're giving you not really a great answer, right? Because there's not a great answer. So don't just keep putting information in there to make it long. You have to stay with what makes sense for the job and what's important about your background. So you can go back in this, class that we're doing here and look at what's important and what's not important to help you figure out what length works for you, right?
Yeah. And we get it. I know that there's a difference between what we're talking about and what, if you're applying for a job on USA Jobs because you want to get a government contract position, they want everything on there. You've got to go through all this rigmarole and stuff like that. I get it. Those are, if you ask the people who hire on that side of the fence, they'll tell you they hate those resumes. There's a reason they hate those resumes, but I know that you have to use them over there. But that means it's not the same on the outside. So if you're, whether it's a government contract or just a straight up civilian position, it's got to be appropriately, it's got to cover everything, and break stuff out. If you've got 20 years of service, you can break stuff out, by duty station, or sometimes even billets. If you have two different billets at the same duty station, you can have two different, entries basically in there listing what your job title was, how long you did it, up to years and months, and then what you did. Just know that the farther back you go, the less bullets you need. What you did 15 years ago, 12 years ago, 10 years ago is less important than what you did yesterday or the last duty station. But it is important if you're applying for a job that says they want 12 years experience. They want to look on your resume and be able to look at those dates and line them all up there and see that every time there's there, you're listing that skill set so they can count it up. And Sarah, I mean, that's in a government contracting gig, that's actually more important than you might think, right?
Yes, so that's actually something we learned just last week when talking with one of the recruiters who helped us get some content together for this class. So when a company is preparing a resume to submit on a contract, they have to count up the number of months of experience that that person has in whatever area of focus it is. Say it's intelligence analysis. So the job needs 18 years, for example. So it's really important that your dates don't overlap. So even if you ended your job on March 15th, you can only count that March one time. So if you did a job from December to March, your next job should start in April, because when the company is trying to count up those months, and again, we just learned this, the government may come back and say, you know what, no, that count up's not right because they counted that month twice. I know it's a little bit confusing and it's kind of new news to us. I don't know if Bob, if you want to hit on that a
Well,
little bit more.
I'm sure it's a little bit that it's not important everywhere for every job, but
Right.
for the particular government contracting piece, it really was. And so these are the types of tips we want to bring to everybody so that you can say, look, doing it well this way is going to cover your bases for all these things. It doesn't mean that it's going to be important everywhere, but the places where it is important, you're going to have that box checked. You're going to have done it the correct way to make the
Right.
job easier for the recruiters who are trying to hire you. I mean, they want to find the right people to work. General style and format. Basically, look, clear and readable is the key. White space is your friend. But Sarah, we talked a little bit today. Your resume goes so many places when you're a job seeker. It's more than just, okay, I've got it printed up and I emailed it to somebody. What kind of things happen to your resume that would make the style and format important?
So in government contracting, resumes have to be formatted and submitted to the government for review. And oftentimes, or I would say always, in my experience, the resume has to be formatted in a certain way. So when it is formatted, it can get really tricky for recruiters when you have a lot of fancy things in your resume, pretty text boxes and, something off to the side that's a new text box. And it's really difficult for recruiters to take that information and put it into the format they need. They don't need it to look pretty, they just need the information.
Yeah, and some of the things we heard, no, you're seeing more and more people put photos on there. I don't think you should, and I think not just from the whole, human resources background of like why you should or shouldn't have your photo, but that's a lot of data in there. And when you go to a job fair at ClearedJobs.Net, we take all of the resumes and we send them to all the companies who were at the job fair. They get a digital file. These are the kind of things that overload the digital file when you're talking about hundreds, 500 resumes that are getting forwarded out to places or put into things. Having that photo, and there's going to get stripped out anyway, and then when it gets stripped out, it's going to look really goofy, the spacing and stuff like that.
Right.
Sometimes those things will cause problems with ATSs, not as much as they used to, but again, still sometimes. And I've seen people who they get so wrapped around the axle with a great formatting box that they have to decrease the font size to get all their stuff in there. Now you've got a fancy box with a bunch of 10-point things, and it's harder to read for these recruiters. So, being trendy, risk versus the reward, that you're going to see a lot of people go, oh, this is a great looking resume. Look, resumes don't get you jobs, they get you interviews. It's what's in the resume, not just how fancy it looks and how trendy it looks. So let's take a look at some actual resumes, Sarah. We pulled a few recently. This was one of our first ones here. Pretty busy, isn't it?
It is. It is. We hear a lot from recruiters. They love to see bullets as opposed to big paragraphs,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, this does have the clearances listed in there.
It does.
But when you look down here where the meat of the resume is, these dates aren't even, it's hard to find where the dates are. They actually don't even go in chronological order. This would be a real mess if someone was trying to figure out how long someone had been doing things.
Exactly. Exactly. So, putting those, like Bob said earlier, listing chronologically in your resume, your jobs, your blocks of time for each position is a lot easier for a recruiter to look at it quickly and say, yes, this person has X number of years of experience, as opposed to having to probably, I think if I was reviewing this one, I probably would have to write it out
Yeah.
and kind of do the math because it's really not very readable, if you will.
Yeah. And you would now, if somebody had such great skills and such hard to find skills, would a recruiter maybe do that? Yeah, maybe. But if your skills were just good and the same recruiter said, well, this is one of the 25 resumes I have to review today, if they can find somebody else without having to break out a scratch pad of paper and do math, then so let's take a look at another one here. This one, another one we just pulled out, we just changed the names. This is all, obviously some, fake personal identification, but the rest of the resume is real there. This was nice right at the top. Available December 2023, willing to relocate.
Yes, I think that's really important. And having that right there at the top, I'd like to see the clearance up there as well.
Yeah.
I think that's I know when you're searching on a job board like ClearedJobs.net, that information is part of the profile, but that's not the only place where resumes are listed. And a lot of times, if the resume is just submitted through an applicant tracking system through a company's careers page, it may not be a checkbox type of thing. So I would add the clearance to the top as well.
Yeah, and this is something that this resume doesn't have it, but a summary section towards the top. People kind of go
Yeah.
back and forth on those things. If a summary section is used well, then it's very valuable. And in the summary section, maybe that's when you can say things like that you're available on such and such a date, you're transferring from, this is where you're willing to go, those types of things. So a summary section that says that information to, and maybe the clearance too, can be really good. This resume also had, they're familiar with, and they just listed G Army, ULSA, ACN, e-manuals. I'm a Navy guy who worked with the Marine Corps most of my time, Sarah, but you were Army. So some of these things you kind of recognize from your Army days.
Right, right. So, when it comes to very specific systems, alls I've heard of, that's I think a logistics one. I was logistics many, many years ago, but that one's familiar to me. But I think when those types of systems are used, maybe having even a description of it, maybe in parentheses what that is, spelled out, because someone who does not have an Army background in this case may not know what those are. And unless the position description specifically says this person must have experience with G-Army, then I'm not saying necessarily take it out, but because if you're looking at a logistics type of position, you may still want that in there. But I would probably spell them out, don't you
Yeah.
think?
Spell it out, explain it. And this is where all of a sudden
Mhm.
that resume where you're like, oh my God, I don't have enough room. Like I wanted to, some people are mad because their resume is too short. Well, explaining what it is you do. And like we went back to the very beginning of that first slide, when ask ask your next door neighbor, ask some parent at your kid's soccer game on Saturday, when you read this, what does it sound like? And they're like, what is this? What is that? How do you explain those things? Um, you
Right.
know, Something else, Sarah, Microsoft Suite. This was a great conversation we had this week too about almost everybody uses this, almost everybody lists it, but there's a difference between some people and other people when it comes to Microsoft products, isn't there?
Yes, definitely. And I mean, just putting that you have experience using Microsoft Word is probably what I would say a space filler, because I don't know very many people who have not touched some part of Microsoft, whether it's Word or PowerPoint. I mean, if you're in the military, especially if you're on the officer side, and I can say that because I've been there, you have used PowerPoint. You don't need to say that you know how to use
You're
PowerPoint.
tabbed out,
I
right? You got
think
the
that
PowerPoint
what's
tab.
yeah, I think what's more important is explaining how you used it. Why was it important you used, especially for some of our more junior soldiers who are transitioning, maybe don't feel like they have as much meat to include in their resume. Maybe they've done, 1 3-year tour and are just trying to figure out what's important and I really need to get at least one page, that there's a great opportunity to still use it, but explain why it was important. How did you use it? Was it part of a report that you had to do every week that had this type of information and you used this system to prepare the report? I think that would hold more value than just saying I have experience with Microsoft Suite.
Yeah, especially I mean, things like Excel. The Excel is one of those things that can be very basic. Like I'm a very basic Excel user. I can make the colors change in the blocks and stuff like that.
Me too.
My wife, she can do it, and she's got mathematical equations that are working inside things. It's a whole different type of Microsoft Excel, and we could both say that we have experience, but and if you're a business that's looking for those things, and you can do that stuff, you can make the equations work, and you can do more than just the average soldier, sailor, airman, whatever. Explain it. Explain what it is you used it for and how you did it, and that makes your resume look better. Makes you as a more attractive candidate too. All right, next resume here, different resume now. We're looking at some stuff. This one had the transitioning, the available start date, and their clearance right up top, just like you
Yes.
like,
Yes.
Sarah.
Yes, I love the transitioning from active duty. I love
Yep.
that part because that, just it explains some of the things in your resume. But again, it goes to this is when I'm available and, opens you up to a conversation about their service too.
But I would actually include the year on there, not just say August 21st, because
Oh, yes, of course. Yes.
resumes they go into job boards like ours. But big companies will have resumes that go into their ATS. They get pulled back out there. And so they really can live on. And just when you think no one's ever going to call you, they're going to go back in and they might give you a buzz. this will let them know whether or not your resume is still relevant and how close you are to being in the job market. Something else we liked about this was if you're doing stuff and you're not done with it, go ahead, put it on there, but put the expected dates, especially if it's a degree or if it's a certification. That can be really, really helpful. Sir, we don't have this highlighted, but I just want to get your take too. I think these skills for this particular resume are really great. This is an example of like some specific stuff that they've done. The kind of stuff that people are going to be looking for.
Yes, we see a lot in positions where it'll have a list in the position description of, IT type tools or, databases or whatever. I'm not much of a tech person, but there would be a big old list of them that are requirements. And when a company, a recruiter does a search in a job board like ClearedJobs.Net, they might create a search that says, I would like to see, someone that has Python or Java or Bash or Linux, and they just put all of these. Your resume, if you have all of these skills written out like that, is going to look like a Christmas tree. That's Bob's reference. It's going to light up like a Christmas tree. It's going to be higher, in the search results if they search by relevance. But it just makes your resume that much more exciting to the recruiter because you have so many things that match what they put in that search.
Yeah. And we get that different people's career paths are different, but IT and technical things lend themselves very well to listing some specific skills. But same thing with logistics, and same thing with Intel, and with just about anything else. List the tools that you use. I mean, even if you did skilled labor, list the kind of tools that you use. Don't just say that you're good with tools. List specifically, power tools and what kind of power tools and all that kind of stuff. All right, so this one here, this is one of the more fancy resumes that kind of like, they still got their clearance listed up there. But Sarah, they got all their stuff on this left-hand side in this little text box, right?
Right. And this is where it can get really tricky with, resumes loading into an applicant tracking system, which is what careers pages for companies kind of funnel to, if you're not familiar. So a lot of times they have a hard time grabbing resumes that have a lot of formatting. Again, resumes that have to be formatted for a government customer to review. Just a lot more difficult for the recruiters to work with when it has fancy boxes off to the side and stuff.
Yeah, and to be fair, this is the information. This is a good resume, really. We both said this is a very good resume as far as what's in it, and so we're kind of nitpicking here a little bit. If you wanted to bring a resume like this as a hard copy someplace, that maybe wouldn't be a bad thing. If you're going to a job fair, we just talked to people at our last job fair and asked all the recruiters, "Do you like to have hard copies brought to you?" And the vast majority of the recruiters at the job fair said yes, they like it. So if you brought a hard copy like this would not be bad. But I wouldn't use this as an electronic version that you're going to upload into a job board, or if you're going to submit for a job fair that's going to go into that database, or if you're submitting it online, right?
Exactly. And I was thinking that as you were getting ready to say it, I had the same thought that I think this is a great one to hand carry. And recruiters may not take your resume from you at a job fair, and that's not a bad thing. It's easier oftentimes for them to review and see what they may have that matches your skills.
But yeah, don't be afraid to have more than one resume. I mean, I was just thinking when I was preparing for this class, if you're in the infantry, you shoot guns, but you know what? You shoot a lot of different kinds of guns for different types of purposes. If you work in the Air Force, you deal with planes, but there's a lot of different kinds of planes. We use different tools for different things. A resume is not a single silver bullet. It's not the magic piece that's going to be there. You're going to have different versions of the same thing for different jobs, different occasions, stuff like that. So don't be afraid to do that stuff. This last resume, this is one we kind of made up, that we just kind of an example of, something that we kind of recommend there, right up top, like we've been talking about, clearance level, adjudication date, if you can, when you're going to get out, all that stuff, listing your key skills. If you can list dates in those key skills, even better. This was the part where we're highlighting where we talked about the name of the place that you've worked, what you did, what the name of your job was, and your dates. And then making sure that whatever you list for your key skills, that you're also identifying that information in the body of the resume. If you say you've got 7 years of doing something, you want to make sure that in the body of the resume, you can count out 7 years of actually doing it. So this is just an example of this is not one that we found. This is just one that we've used. And it's a basic resume we use for lots of people, not just for veterans. But it's just a good example for some of those things. So Sarah, you want to wrap it up here?
Well, sure. And there was one thing I was thinking about when you were going through that last resume, and it's come up before, is What if you want to do something that's a little different than what your last job was like in the military? That is where a summary at the top of your resume or that kind of objective statement paragraph can be really important because we've seen those types of resumes, right, Bob?
Yeah.
Where, someone's been doing the same thing for a long time and then they kind of shifted to doing, some cyber work for a while. And cyber is what they really want to do. I think it's important to include that if that's what you're looking for, because that will differ than when the recruiter's looking at your resume trying to determine what to consider you for.
Yeah, we saw one of those and we just didn't have time for in this particular episode of Military Monday because we could have gone for a long, long time, but we did see one that,
Yes.
and that's a great point that your resume, when you're doing a transition from not just the military, but from one industry or one field to another, can be a unique type of resume for that kind of stuff too. So, as we wrap it up here, we most of these things we've already kind of really talked about, is there anything on here that really jumps out at you, Sarah, that you'd like to hammer home before we leave?
No, just other than, there's no 100% right answer, silver bullet way. You're going to get a lot of feedback from a lot of different people. So, and, expect that and just have different versions of your resume. That way you can, put them in different ways, depending on what you need them for.
Yeah. I put, don't dilute your experiences, distill them down, make sure that it's related to the job or the field. And the last bullet there, communication is what the reader does. It's up to, you don't know who's going to read the resume, where it's going to be used from. Some recruiters are going to really get they're going to know about the Army or the Navy. They're going to know about the field. They're going to be awesome at it. There's going to be others that are not. They're just brand new at recruiting, or maybe the company does something different that you're trying to do. It's up to us as the sender of the message to try to craft that message in a way that the reader or the listener understands it. So you're always thinking about, you can't just look at this resume and say like, well, they'll figure it out. It's up to them to figure it out. No, it's up to us, the job seekers, to make sure that it adequately explains everything in a way that they can understand it. Because when you do that, that's when you're going to have that connection. And then you get the interview. Then when you're talking to the program manager, the hiring manager, then you can really get into the details of things about, the soft skills and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, we've gone just a little bit over 30 minutes. If you're looking for us, we're on LinkedIn. Sarah, you and I both happy to connect, right? With everybody.
Absolutely. Please do send us a connection. And if you see there on the left-hand side of your screen at the bottom, there's transitioning military. We have some extra points in there. We, sometimes we'll put links to blogs, I think, go
Mhm.
from there. And also the podcast. So we have a lot of companies, over 100 podcast episodes, different companies talking about, different parts of their recruiting and their company. And sometimes they focus on hiring veterans and how they do that. It's a really great place. It's not just for recruiters. The podcast is for, the job seekers as well.
Yeah, that's on the ClearedJobs.Net site. Scroll down, you'll see all
Yeah.
that stuff. All that stuff is great. To include the transitioning military. We're a veteran friendly. We're a veteran owned organization. We are definitely here for you. So if you have questions, hit us up, reach out to us, connect with us on LinkedIn. We hope that you're having a great Monday, being that it's Military Monday. And if you like to any more information, let us know. But other than that, we're going to let you guys go and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.